Greetings, folkaroos. It's Haley, and welcome back to my second attempt at recording this video because, for whatever reason, the computer didn't capture the audio on my first attempt. But that'll still that'll be fine because this week was interesting. This is definitely not one of my best showings, and I think there's a very significant reason for that. I think the reason is that this past week I've been putting my mental effort into other things. The two main things have been my work, which I work from home and I do tasks that require a lot of mental effort. And also, I've been inspired to pick up another language recently, and I've been studying Korean. So I've been doing other things mentally rather than playing chess as much this week. And by the way, that's why I titled the video what I did. It's a aju napun, which in Korean means very bad. And you will see why that title is very apt when we get into these games. So let's just load up that review real quick on this first game. This first game was definitely the most interesting game of this meet, and let's get into it. I mean, let's just stop the talking and let's see. E4, C6, of course. We barely even have to talk about this anymore. D4, D5. But it gets a little bit funky when he doesn't play any of the main lines, like taking, like knight C3, even something like knight D7 or like E5. Like he plays on F3, which is known as the fantasy variation. And the reason it's called that is because after this and this, which happens in the game, but I do kind of have a way to fight against it, white gets the chess fantasy, which is having two very powerful pawns in the center, quick development, and a very easy game. This is like the ultimate fantasy for chess players. But the way to fight back against it accurately is to play pawn to E5, which if white takes, you could trade the queens. That's one thing that you could do. Also, there is queen h4 check, and you can't block with g3 because there's a fork, so the king has to move. So yeah, that's a little thing that can happen if takes. But yeah, knight f3 is the main move against the fantasy, and the main line goes something like this: takes and bishop c4 is the main. It's kind of like a Scotch gambit. This is known as the Marozzi gambit. I remember I talked about him last time. He came up with a lot of these weird openings, and this is one of them. But yeah, after knight f3, I already mess up. I play bishop g4, and then I take, which is just not good. Like after bishop c4, the computer likes the following continuation: knight d7, c3, then bishop h5 to avoid h3 g4, then castles knight gf6 hitting the pawn, queen e1, bishop takes because the queen removed guard, and then g takes f3, knight h5, and bishop e3. This is what the computer wanted us to do from that position, but instead I played bishop takes f3, and now checkmate is threatened, and I have to be very careful because I can't just play a move like knight f6. If I play knight f6, then d takes e5 happens, and I have to give up my knight, or play queen to a5, which is a check, and picks up the pawn. But yeah, after that I played queen c7, which does defend the f7 pawn, but apparently queen f5 is very good here. I'm not really sure why that's so much better than just like castling in this position, because he does castle, which just applies a ton of pressure there. But in both of those lines, like I play knight f6, so I don't really understand why queen f5 is so good. Yeah, but if he took in this position, uh, and if I played queen takes, then obviously this happens. So yeah, castles, and I have to be careful. I play knight f6, and if he takes, I can take back, which is good. So c3, bishop d6, I'm just getting my bishop out. h3. The reason he played this, by the way, is to prevent this and then taking on h2 because you open up the battery. But also, first audience moment right here. find the ridiculous move that the computer recommends to destroy the pawn structure over here and trade pieces. That's like the idea. It doesn't have to happen. Chess isn't checkers, but that's the idea. And if you're able to figure it out, kaboom! As you say in Korean, mapsosa. Like, oh my god. Like, this is a crazy move. Because if pawn takes, then queen takes knight. And if any other move is played, like castling, then bishop takes g7 is possible because this happens. And it's mate in 5. That's mate. But yeah, after here he plays h3 to avoid me taking the pawn. Then I castle, eliminating that threat, so he can't play bishop h6 really anymore. Because if he goes bishop h6 in this position, then I can just play knight b to d7, and I don't have to take. And if he tries to go here and threaten checkmate, then I have knight back to e8. Which guards g7. Yeah, boy, I'm tired. All right. Yeah, so he goes bishop e3, just developing the pieces. We get our knights out. Rook a to e8. By the way, I didn't want to go here because with all this pressure staring at my f7 pawn, I didn't like that my king would be the only one defending it if I went there, so I go rook a to e8. Rook a c1, right? And then he goes, I go knight b6. Hitting the bishop, right? Because it's like the most annoying piece that white has. So in the interest of protecting it, he moves it back, but I don't know why he didn't just stay on the same diagonal. Like, that seems like the intelligent choice to me. Knight f to d7. This looks like a strange move, but it has a kind of okay purpose. And that purpose is to play f5 at some point and try to open up the f file against this. But f5 isn't possible at all right now because white controls that square so many times. Like, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking already. But yeah, queen to g4. This threatens to come down here and threaten mate and force me to give up my rook to stop it. So I play rook e6. And if bishop h6 here, I obviously just take. So after rook e6, he goes d5, which is a very bad move because of boom, boom, and boom. Do you see the problem? Bishop h6 is impossible. This is hit. The best move for white is to sack the bishop. Here, queen here, here, and take the knight. That's the best move. But then knight f6, and black can just spring back into action. These pieces aren't really doing anything, and that's pretty good for black. But yeah, rook g6. I attack the queen instead. And then after the queen moves, I play c5 because I like the idea of permanently shutting down this bishop. But apparently that was a bad move because he can play like b3 and just clamp down, control my knight really hard, and I can't get like any of these pawn pushes or anything. So this c pawn is just kind of a sitting duck, basically. But yeah, h4. Instead of that, he plays h4, trying to go after my rook, which would be protected by the queen. So I play this. He allows me to push the pawn, which I almost reconsidered, because I really didn't like the fact that this pawn might be a little bit vulnerable in an endgame. Like, I was kind of trying to calculate whether or not that I would be able to hold on to that pawn in an endgame, but I calculated that I would be able to, so I did that. So bishop e2, he backs up, he doesn't want to lose his bishop, and I go bishop c5, and this is the first very interesting audience moment. This looks like it blunders a pawn, but what happens if white takes it with the bishop? How can black win a piece? Audience moment. And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is boom, with check. Queen takes, knight takes, knight takes, queen takes. That's how you win a piece. But Haley, you may be asking, what if knight takes? Because here, the knight can take. What now? Well, this is audience moment part 2. What happens in this position? How can black win a piece in this position? And if you were able to figure it out, it's here first. You have to take the knight first so that it cannot take back. The queen has to take, and then this can happen. So yeah, I play bishop c5, and he doesn't fall for it. He plays b4, attacking my bishop, and I play en passant. He takes. I kind of expected him to take with the knight and double attack my bishop. I don't know why he didn't do that, but me sitting here after the game, I know why he did that, and that was the reason to have the reason was to have all those pawns together, right? Bishop takes e3, and I simplify into this endgame, which is a very, very bad idea because these pawns, the ones that I just mentioned before, are going to be a marching like infantry that will just bully all of my pieces back and just relentlessly march towards promotion. Like, look at this. B4 attacking my knight. Knight here. I'm like, I'm pressuring this pawn and I might go here. C4. Just C4. And this is happening. And this is happening too. Like, I'm starting to struggle a little bit. So knight c8. I mean, the computer wanted me to straight up play a5 and sacrifice a pawn to go knight to d7 because this pawn is apparently easier to stop than if it were here. I didn't do that because I'm a human being and instead go knight here because maybe I want to reroute and I also maybe want to open my rook up over here. Here, a6. And the goal with this was to play b5. And after I played that, I thought I blundered because here. And I was like, well, if knight takes back, trying to get my knight back in the game, I just lose a pawn, but I forgot that this could happen. So that wasn't actually a blunder. He goes knight b3, and his goal here is to go knight a5. This is like the quickest way to access these squares that will be helpful for him to push his pawns in the future. Knight e7, I'm trying to play f5, but this is an inopportune moment for it because knight a5, f5, he has the move d6. Just striking back at my knight, which is a defender of this pawn, and I can't go here because the knight is on a5 controlling that. So I can only go to c8. Then he takes my pawn, and I go here. By the way, ridiculous computer moment. Best move here was to sack the rook straight up for 2 pawns. Because the computer prefers being down 4 points of material to having to deal with these pawns. Which I can understand. But yeah, I go here again because I'm a human being. D7, right, and then I go knight e7, and I'm stopping the pawn temporarily. And if he goes something like rook d2, then I can play rook to not there, but rook to d8. He goes knight b7. I go here. I'm just stopping this and blockading this. I think I'm doing all right here, but there's just bishop f3. This attacks my knight. And if I go back, then he trades and pushes. And that's a problem. Because even if I'm able to take here, he's just going to make another queen and win my rook. So yeah, knight b6 is the only move, trying to get as many defensive pieces in there as possible. c7, rook takes here, boom, boom, king f7. And now we have simplified it into an endgame where he has an extra bishop. But it is a 2-on-1 over here. So it's still pretty interesting. Also, this pawn is a little bit weak. So yeah, he goes g4 to protect the pawn. Very nice move. And I go king e7. Now, the reason I went king e7 is because I want my king and ideally the rest of my pieces to be on dark squares because his bishop is a light squared bishop. So that's just kind of a positional consideration that I made in this position. But yeah, bishop e4. This is an inaccuracy. It just wants to permanently hold on to this while this happens, right? He wants to be able to play g5, but there is this. And if he plays g5 in this position, then here, and that bishop is going to be hit, and those 2 pawns are in danger, and this, I could be coming back. But yeah, bishop f3, he goes instead, and then I push. I push just to get the bishop out. And then he goes here. And folks, audience moment. What is the move that I can play to attack 2 of his pieces at the same time? So I can't take the bishop right now because I'm pinned. So what move can I play to guarantee winning a piece? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is king to d7. I just hit the rook and the bishop is hit at the same time, so I'm going to win a piece. So you may be like, Haley, how is this still completely winning for white? Well, the answer is because he can go g5. He can go g5, and if I take on f5, he can play bishop g4, pinning my rook. So you may be like, well, Haley, then just don't take there, right? And you're still hitting two pieces. Rook e to c1. And if I take the bishop, then rook 1 to c7 is checkmate. So I'm actually not winning anything. But he gets scared and he goes rook g8 because he's trying to find a counterplay, right? So I take the bishop, he takes the pawn, I go up to d6. And I'm thinking about in this moment, I really don't like that I sometimes do this. I was thinking in my head, like, oh, today's video is going to be called Do Call It a Comeback instead of Don't Call It a Comeback because I'm going to come back and win this game. But it's never good to assume that while you're actually playing the game. I should learn this from the times I thought I was Beth Harmon. I was also kind of dressed up a little bit nice for this meeting, so I just feel like that gives me an unnecessary ego boost, especially playing at the level that I played this week. So yeah, king f2. He just goes after my pawn, and I find a very nifty move in this position. h5. And if he takes, he decimates his pawn structure. And I hold on to this pawn, and this is also a target, and it's even. This, if he tries to like protect his pawns like this, then rook takes h4, and also this. And also this is still protected. So he find, and you may be like, well, Haley, king takes, right? Boom. Rook protects pawn, and then this is falling right after. So he finds the best move, which is rook a7. If I take the pawn, he's going to take on a6 with check, and I cannot go and defend my rook. I'm just going to lose it. Just going to lose my rook. So yeah, I saw that and went king to d5, opening up defense. But yep, he just plays check. I block, takes, g5. This does literally sacrifice two pawns, but these are too powerful. Rook h4, king f3. He does allow me to go here, and if this happens, then I have a very nifty move, rook g5, which I didn't find, unfortunately. Rook g5, because I was nervous about here, right? I was like, well, what if this happens? Then check. And if he wants to keep doing that, it can be a draw. But if he doesn't do that, this, I take. If he pushes this, I take. And if he does anything else with the rook, I take. So I'm kind of forcing his hand a little bit here. But I don't play that. Instead, I go king to d5. Because I'm like, well, I'm going to go here and get the pawn, but then he can play rook there. Guarding the pawn, rook e8 was better. Prince we could just harass me and give me checks like this and maybe try to pick up my h5 pawn because I can't push it or else I will lose the rook. Right? Rook takes b4. I think that I can take and then come back and defend, but this is the critical mistake of the game. Rook a6. King e5. I still had a chance to go rook g4 and maybe like do something, right? Like rook g4, f6, takes, f7. I mean, I'm just going to lose this, and I have a fighting chance, I have a fighting chance. But yeah, rook a6 here and here, and if I go here, audience moment, this is the obvious move. But what's a more flashy way that you can win the game and block the attack on the pawn? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is rook to g6. And if king f3, which is what I played, takes as a check, sure, but you're just not in time to catch the pawn. And realizing this, I resigned. And unfortunately, I could not name this video Do Call It a Comeback. So, yeah, a little bit dejected, I move on to my next opponent, which was a high school aged boy. At least that's what he looked like. He looked like a high school aged boy. Just sitting there on his phone in between games. I was like, hey, you want to play a game? And sure. And this guy was very interesting because he had what I like to term the Reagan temperament. And for people who know my sister, uh, that is very accurate because what the Reagan temperament is you're just like very good at something, but the whole time you're doing it, you're just like, I suck. Like, you could easily beat me. I'm terrible. Like, I probably won't even see the move that you see. Like, I don't know how I've lasted this long. Like, you're saying stuff like this, right? But yeah, you will see how this is exemplified in this game. You will see, right? E4, D6. This is an indicator of a couple different things. This is what is known as the Peert's defense, which is where you play d6 and g6 and bishop g7 against pawn e4 instead of pawn d4, which is the standard opening where the King's Indian defense is played. D4 taking the full center, G6, C4, and in this position, not in that position, in this position, he asked me, isn't this the Austrian attack? And I was like, well, I don't really remember, but the computer tells me it's the Averbach variation of the modern defense, which is pretty close. So it also starts with an A. But yeah, the point is to I'm gonna play f4 because against the King's Indian, I like to play what is known as the four pawns attack. But he plays the only way to prevent me from playing the four pawns attack, which is the immediate e5, which looks bad because you just shut down the bishop, but actually it's not that big of a hindrance because you can just develop around it and eventually try to chip away at it with the pawns and pieces. Knight f6, he just develops, and I play h3 because I'm like, well, his next move is almost certainly going to be castles. So I'm going to take a tempo here to play h3, stop any piece from coming to g4, and then play knight f3. The computer, however, being the computer, suggests pawn to g4. And not to play g5, by the way. After c6, it's like knight f3, bishop e2. Like, I just don't understand. Like, g4, maybe you're preventing this and this, but like, I don't understand why you have to do this. I really don't. Like, I wouldn't like doing that with my king in this situation, right? Knight f3, knight b to d7, bishop e3. We're just getting our pieces out. b6, and I was happy to see this. I was happy to see this. Because here and his bishop is just not looking at anything, and if he goes here, his bishop's also not looking at anything after I play b3. Bishop d3, and he can't play this, going after my bishop, so I was happy about that. And, queen e7, just another standard developing move. This game's going pretty slow for the King's Indian so far. b4, interesting move designed to prevent this. Knight e8. This move may look like a very questionable move to people who aren't familiar with the King's Indian, but the main idea of the King's Indian is at some point to move this knight here or here and then push the f-pawn. This is the idea. And this is why I don't like playing the King's Indian, because you allow yourself to get a huge space disadvantage, and then you attack using the pawn in front of your king. But at mid to high level, not at the Grandmaster level, but at mid to high amateur level, this is a very theoretically sound opening. And White has to play accurately. The queen to d2, right? So watch this, right? b4. And if he tries to play a5 in this position, making me maybe push and then knight c5, I can play a3. Because takes, I still get a pawn on b4, open up the a file, and take back. But as soon as I play queen to d2, I undefend my rook, and he immediately punishes me for it by playing a5. And he was just completely silent at this point. But yeah, this is where the Reagan temperament comes in. Because, like, he's just perfectly punishing me for this inaccurate move. But at the same time, he was like, yeah, I don't even really know what opening this is. Like, I always get crushed by it. I was like, excuse me, sir? Are you trying to be humble, or are you trying to insult me? Like, I don't know what you're doing. B takes, he activates his rook on the a file. Bishop g5, and this is where my thinking got a little bit weird, because I was like, well, f6, I force him to spend a tempo on this, and then he's going to have to spend an extra tempo. But I just spent 2 tempi moving my bishop back and forth. Like, that's an equal trade-off of tempo. Knight c5. He plants the knight on the square. Bishop h6. Huge blunder. Audience moment. How can black take advantage of the connection between the queen and the bishop to win a piece? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is kaboom, check, boom, boom. Because when stuff like this usually happens, like when the connection can get interrupted by a take, if this wasn't a check, I could throw in this first and then take back the knight so I don't end up losing a piece. But since this is a check, I can't do that. And I just resign. Because I'm like, this guy's good. I just can't play with him down a piece. Like, that's just not going to work out in the long run. And maybe I regret that decision now. Maybe I could have come back. But seeing how he plays in the next game, I don't regret that decision at all because he is a very, very competent player, right? Karo Khan, blah, blah, blah. F3. Look here, folks. He plays the fantasy variation. He was just like, well, I get crushed by the Khan all the time, so I figured out that this is a good weapon against that, but I don't really know. He was like, I don't really know anything else after that. But in this case, I actually believe him because I do end up getting a nice advantage from the opening. Because e5 is what I'd play. Instead of the takes, and then e5, I play the immediate e5. And the idea of this is because with takes, he gives up the diagonal. And if he takes this pawn, queen b6 is played, constructing a battery. And if he moves the knight out of the way of being attacked, audience moment, find the checkmate in 2 moves. And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is bishop to f2 here, and yeah, that's mate. That's just game over. So yeah, he played c4, and this is an inaccuracy because of a fun little trick with the center pawns. Boom, boom, and I can take a pawn for free. But I also have a better move, which existed in the other game I played against the fantasy as well. Queen h4, the same idea, forcing him to move the king because he can't go here, else I will fork his king and rook. Right? So this is the one time that I'm inclined to believe him when he says that he did not study this line too much. So e takes d4, and then I reinforce that pawn with another pawn, and I'm just like, well, I'm doing well. Because if he plays b4, I'm going to go b6. Computer wanted me to take. And then if this happens, just to step off the trading thread and then play knight c6. Pardon me if I didn't go for this, computer. Literally 0 pieces are developed. There's doubled pawns here. The only pieces I've moved are a very passively positioned queen and a very overextended pawn. Pardon me for not realizing it was minus 1.18, computer. Oh my god. Yeah, so I went b6 because I'm like, well, takes. And then I'm going to go bishop b7 and target that pawn and just develop my knights. Right, so bishop to f4, knight c6, and yeah, he plays b5. Just going after my knight, but this is a mistake, actually, because of knight c to e7. Because of knight c to e7. Again, this is one of those positions where it doesn't look that good for black, but this pawn chain is rated very highly by the engine, and if something like bishop d3 happens, then just knight g6 attacking the bishop. If it goes back to g3, then knight f6. Yeah, and if this happens, then knight g4. And black is just better. Like, this pawn chain is very powerful. But yeah, after bishop f4, knight c6, b5, I try to get fancy with the guy. I play queen f6 because I'm like, oh, if he takes, I'm gonna take his bishop. Yeah, and I immediately noticed what was wrong with this, like about 5 seconds after playing it, and I kind of put my face in my hands and started sighing and shaking my head. And him being him, he said, I'm sure whatever blunder you see, I don't see it. And then 10 seconds later, he blitzes out the move bishop g5, which is the best move because you attack my queen and the knight is also under attack. By the way, if he went here, that's just a free bishop. So yeah, I was like, well, he can't go there, but I missed that he could go the other way. And I go here, boom, boom, knight c3, audience moment. Why can't I take this? What did taking this open up? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is queen all the way down to d checkmate. So he's just able to do this, develop a knight to a square where it's attacked by a pawn, and I just can't take it. But I was like, yeah, bishop b7. I'm still attacking your knight, and I'm attacking this pawn. Why am I not just winning a pawn here? And the reason I'm not winning a pawn here is because of knight to d5. Also, knight e5 was good. Knight e5, by the way, just attacks the queen before I can take the knight. But yeah, knight d5 just gets in the way. And if I try to play like knight e7, trying to trade it off, he hops in with the other knight. And I can't go here attacking the knight and threatening the fork because, boom, just lose my queen. So, yeah, that's chill. Just queen c8, takes, here, here, and here. And I'm just dead lost because after king e8, I lose my queen. And after king to g8, knight takes e7 is literally double knight checkmate. That's insane. But yeah, after king e8, how can white win my queen? Kind of. How can, I mean, it doesn't quite win my queen, but how can white check me and attack my queen at the same time? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is kaboom. Discovering an attack. But the queen can block, but the reason this is still completely losing is because after takes, there's knight a8. And if this happens, then knight c7 picks the bishop up with the knight. And I'm just losing. But yeah, after here, I resign. Because there's no way I can beat this guy down 4 points of material. And folks, that is the Reagan temperament in action. Yeah, so I have two sisters. I don't think I've said their names before. Their names are Reagan and Quinn. And the Reagan temperament is this. The Quinn temperament, however, is just, playing random moves. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but just for the sake of having fun. But yeah, this guy just, I don't know if he was trying to be humble or if he was trying to disguise the fact he was good. But yeah, I just got crushed because I was playing very poorly because I was just extremely mentally tired uh, after doing lots of work and learning a new language. So yeah, now I have some other games to show you. And you may be like, well, Haley, who the hell is this Amelioration YT person that we're looking at? And folks, that is my otherchess.com account. Because something you might not know about me is when I was picking my name, I was stuck between the names Haley and Amelia. And of course, I ended up going with Haley. But I still like this name, so I decided on using it for one of my online personas. So, yep, that's the story behind that name, and YT because I have a YouTube channel. So, yeah, D4. This is a blitz chess game that I played. It's 3 minutes for each side. And the reason I included this is because fast chess games are always fun to spectate. Like, you never know what's going to happen in these games, especially that there's no increment. Like, you just have 3 minutes to make all your moves. That's it. You don't get any bonus time. So, ridiculous things can happen. So, D4, and like I've said a few times before, my repertoire against D4 is knight F6 because it's the most flexible option. It is able to meet anything that white plays, like this, like this. You can't play e4, it stops that. Like f3, e4, maybe c3, c4. The most common response is c4, but knight f3 is played by the opponent. Then e6, just building up for d5. And I might want to try to play c5 at some point to just activate the bishop and castle. Very solid position. Bishop g5, bishop e4, I counterpin. This is known as what white is doing right now is known as the Richter-Verasov attack. And the idea is to just put early pressure on this knight and constrain black's responses and like kind of prevent them from being able to do something like this. Right, queen d3, just defending the knight with the queen so they don't have to destroy the pawn structure. Castles, castles, and c5, right? 12 seconds have been spent, and I already have a better position because I get in the thrust c5, and I'm going to quickly develop my forces behind that. But it's still a double-edged position. After d takes c5, Why is bishop takes c5 a mistake? What move can white play, audience moment, to strike in the center and generate a big initiative? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is pawn to e4. You know, because you are threatening to come down here and pawn attack the knight that is pinned to the queen. And if pawn takes, no, that would be silly. If pawn takes, then this happens. So yeah, after bishop takes c5, he doesn't see that, and instead he plays pawn to e3, right? So I go knight c6, and now the threat of that is kind of removed because I'm defending the queen 2 times. H6. After h4, I kind of saw this as my opportunity to kick the bishop off of the pin because it can't retreat to h4. And actually, this is a common trap in chess known as the fishing pole trap. And white can just play a3. And as the Koreans say, "도대체 뭐요?" That means, what the hell? Like, can't I just take the bishop? But the idea of the fishing pole trap is to dangle out a bishop for black to take. But upon taking it, then this happens. And if the knight moves, that is checkmate. So yeah, that's the fishing pole trap. And it happened in this position. But yeah, bishop to f4. And now I can play rook e8 and e5, e4, and I have the advantage immediately. Rook e8, e5, e4. By the way, funny computer moment again. We've had a lot of these this episode. E4, as you can see here, is the top move of the engine when I'm reviewing the game. But according to the game review, it is an inaccuracy because I should have gone here. Like, huh. And also it's an inaccuracy that doesn't drop the evaluation at all. Like, I just sometimes weird stuff like that happens. But yeah, knight takes. I mean, white could have played queen to b5, attacking the bishop, and then move the knight. So after bishop here, then knight d4. Wait, no, sorry, knight to d4. Yeah, and black is still winning after knight takes and e takes because the pawns are powerful. But yeah, he plays knight e4, which I can just take and hit again. He plays everything and then goes knight e5, and I'm just up 2 points of material in a pretty simplified endgame. Knight here, attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn. So he trades. It's like the only good move. Then here, knight c6. I'm maybe trying to go over here, but I can't do that right now. So maybe here, attacking the bishop. f3. This blunders a pawn, yes, but it also blunders exchange. And an exchange, by the way, is when you win a rook for a minor piece. Audience moment, how can black win the exchange in this position? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is bishop takes e3, the very simple fork, right? You should have been able to get that. Yeah, here, and then here. And I still could have done this, but I never like to have my bishops in a line like this because a rook can sometimes take advantage of that, but it can't really in this position. But I'm just a little bit careful, and I go here, here. He gets a check. I just slide over to h8, and he has no more checks to give. So he goes here because my plan was to go here and pin the bishop to the rook. So he gets in the way. So after this, he can move the bishop and not lose the rook. Pretty smart. g5. I thought this was just the nail in the coffin because here, the bishop can't move, right? Yeah, it can. In fast chess, I forgot that the bishop now defends the rook. Yeah, so I didn't see that. Instead, I could have just lost a pawn in that position. But he goes here, which he thought it was a good intermezzo, but it just hangs the rook in one move. But I miss it, and I go king to g7. Oh boy, like I shouldn't be making moves like this because it's still 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Rook g1 pins the pawn. King f6 gets out of the pin. Then bishop h2, which is a mistake because again, I can win an exchange by bishop takes e3. Knight e5, attacking the bishop. And if this, I open up the rook. Bishop b3. Again, blundering bishop e3. I mean, bishop b3, again, blundering bishop e3 here. So knight here, I attack both of these. Good enough, right? Rook f1 pins the knight. but I can still take on e3. And I can protect it with a pawn also, which is what I do. Then here, I slide out of the way, the rook tries to invade, and also I could have sacrificed here. Could have sacrificed here because this pawn is going to be extremely powerful because the bishop, right? The bishop controls the promotion square. So if I'm able to get the pawn here, it's going to promote, right? So yeah, I didn't see that. But yeah, here, here, then he goes there, and I push. I really don't know why I did this because I just lose a pawn, but actually there's rook h8 threatening this. I didn't see that. But I think I just played that out of panic, but he does this, which doesn't work at all because then here, then here, and none of his pieces can stop me. He can't go here. This bishop can't stop me, and this rook can't stop me either. So I'm just gonna promote, right? Like the game's over. Bishop h6 check. He just gives up a bishop. Boom, promote, and then it's a bishop versus a bishop, knight, and rook. So I should clearly be winning, right? Rook f2. But if I included this game in this video, you know that that wasn't the conclusion of this game. King d3, rook f3, right? I'm just going after the pawn. I'm gonna win that pawn. Rook takes e3 here. We shuffle around a bit. I lose a pawn, which is a bit weird, but then I check. No clue why I didn't just take this. I that would have made my life a gazillion times easier. But a5, I decided to try to like do something fancy with this. I have no clue. But yeah, c3 here checks, and I decide to sacrifice my rook because I'm like, well, he has no pieces left, and knight and bishop will always beat pawns. That's not quite true. Knight e5. It is true a lot of times, but it's not always true. Knight e5, king b5. And we get some more shuffling. My king is stuck on the side of the board, which is going to play a big role. Knight takes c6. I'm sacrificing pieces for pawns, but now this is bad because although the bishop can support the pawn, a passed pawn can be created on this file. And it's just a draw because I'm going to have to sacrifice my bishop for it, and then he'll take this pawn. King e3, boom, shuffle around a bit. Here, there, bishop b6. Here, bishop c7. If he took, then here, here, and here was a draw. But yeah, bishop c7. b5 is completely losing for white. Audience moment. Find the critical idea here. Notice the king's positioning. Find the critical idea to force white into a zugzwang. And a zugzwang, by the way, is German for compulsion to move. And it is where any move made is a disadvantage for the player that makes it. And if you're able to figure out the idea, it's king a2. And the king cannot move. This pawn cannot move. So the only legal move is to lose this pawn, and then the only legal move is to go here. And then if this, you're too slow to catch the pawn. So that was the critical winning idea. But instead I played bishop b6, and it's a stalemate because now this pawn that could push before can't push, but white has no legal moves. And it's just a draw. Yeah, I missed a critical zugzwang idea with 21 seconds remaining on the clock, and I drew. All right, so now, folks, we reach the finale of this video. This game right here. So this is a game played between another one of my favorite chess YouTubers and an opponent. And the characters I have chosen for this game are from the show on Netflix known as Half Bad, The Bastard Son, and the Devil Himself. And the characters are Nathan, who is the main character of the show, and Jessica, who is his like psycho sister who joined like a hunting force to try to track him down. You know, that's a very simplified explanation of the show, but yeah, people who watch it will know that this is a very contentious matchup. So yeah, the YouTuber is playing as Nathan, and the opponent's playing as Jessica, right? So let's just turn on the review real quick. And let's hop into it. E4, E5. And this opening is this YouTuber's favorite opening. So he plays bishop to B5, which is the Spanish opening. The Spanish opening is after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, right? And it looks like the idea is to put pressure on this knight because it guards the pawn, right? So the main move is a6. And you may be like, well, Haley, this just wins a pawn for white, correct? No, incorrect. That is not right. Audience moment. Find the way that black can regain their pawn through a fork. And if you're able to figure out, the answer is queen to d4. Queen to d4, hitting the knight and the pawn. Right. So if you go something like queen f6, you only hit the knight, and then white can play d3. So yeah, that's the theoretical refutation to that. But in this position, there are like as many variations as atoms of the universe. Like a6, black can play d6, black can play d5, black can play queen e7, queen here, bishop c5, bishop e7, knight here, knight knight here, and the list goes on, right? But the variation that Jessica or the opponent chooses in this position is knight g to e7, which is known as the Cosio defense, with the idea of a6 and then taking back with a knight instead of a pawn to avoid damaging the pawn structure. Castles a6, bishop a4. White keeps their bishop on the side of the board and forces black to overextend to kick it out, right? d6. Both sides are kind of clarifying what they want to do here. White is obviously trying to play d4 and strike in the center. Bishop e6. This is already a critical mistake from black, but it does go unpunished. And the reason this is a critical mistake is because of knight to g5. Knight to g5. And then you're just like, well, can't black go back? The bishop leaving this diagonal opens up a very powerful move for white. Audience moment. What is the powerful move that threatens the f7 pawn? And if you're able to figure it out, it's bishop to b3. And it's very hard for black to defend that pawn. But yeah, YouTuber does not see that. Instead, plays h3. Like, if he didn't see that, I expected him to maybe go here. But he goes h3, which I just don't really understand. Because the bishop by black was already committed to e6, so why would the bishop come here? I just don't get it. h6, d4. Now we strike back in the center. Now we're creating some meaningful threats, right? Black has to either move the bishop back or take, and they decide to move back. Rook e1, b5. Now this is clearly the best move because now you don't have as much threat with this because pieces can't really join the attack. Knight g6. And I think this was covered in another game, this idea, but rotating the knight out to f4 could be a possibility for Jessica here. Knight b to d2, bishop e7, both sides are just developing their pieces, and white plays knight f1. Now, again, this is another opening specific move that may look weird to people who don't play the Spanish often, but the goal of this is to rotate the knight to e3 or g3 and pressure maybe some of these light squares in the center. This is a very commonly seen rotation in the Spanish game. I played it all the time when I used to play the Spanish. Bishop f6. We get a strange move from black. Just spending another tempo to put the bishop in a very awkward position where it isn't really doing anything. D takes, knight c takes, knight e5. Audience moment. Out of these three pieces, which one is the best to take back with? And there is a clear answer, really. And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is bishop takes is clearly the better move because you prevent f4 and you don't wreck this. You could make an argument for pawn takes, but I don't like that particular transformation of the pawn structure because you open up the d file. But the worst option is knight takes because of f4. The knight can just be bullied away. Knight c4. Now e5 can just shred open the center and prepare to open up the rook. And if this happens, you're like, well, Haley, they're losing a piece. p3. Just go here. And then you're going to take here, and you're going to have massive threats. But yeah, b3 is played in this position, which is not a good move at all. Audience moment. What did this pawn undefend? And what move can black play to fork the rooks? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is ba-boom. And you're just going to lose the rook. You might get the knight and an extra piece for it. But yeah, this is just going to happen. And then when this moves to reveal an attack, black's just going to go back. But yeah, knight b6. Black did not see that fork. Instead goes knight b6. And now we get the opening up of the center. Takes, queen e2. What this does is it prevents black from castling because then they would lose the bishop. Bishop to e6. f5. The bishop moves back. You're like, well, what purpose did that serve? f6. Just completely sacrificing a pawn. Because if this takes, then knight g3 and knight f5, and the bishop cannot take, right? So yeah, that's the idea, but f6 was not played by the YouTuber. Instead, bishop a3 was played, which is another very good move, because you are threatening to win this pawn. And if queen to c7 were to be played, that would take the defense off of this, and obviously blunder checkmate. That did not happen. Instead, we got this. Bishop takes d6. Big blunder by white. Audience moment, how can black fork the king and the bishop? And if you're able to figure it out, the answer is queen to b6. Hitting the king on the open diagonal, which is a risk of pushing the f-pawn. I've said this many times. Queen f2. my voice is a little bit tired because I recorded this video twice. Queen d6. Right? You just lose a piece, and it's still like okay for white because rook a to d1 and c4 is a threat. But we get king h1, queen here, and then rook a d1 and c4 instantly, and white is immediately back into the game. Because after this, the knight is hit and it is pinned to the queen. And white's just going to win back the knight. But we get bishop c6, c4, knight c3, which is even worse because it counterattacks the queen and you attack the queen, but here, and here? I mean, the best move was this. Because after knight to d4, you can play rook c7 and win the bishop. Right? Because you can't go here and defend the bishop, you can't go here and defend the bishop, you can't move any of the rooks to defend the bishop, so you're just going to win it. But after rook takes e2, rook c8, defending the bishop. And then if you try to like scoop around and try to do this, king f8 breaks the pin while they still have time. So yeah, this is a little bit inaccurate. It's one of those moments where like you feel like both pieces are good to take, but one of them is actually much better. Bishop d7, rook back, trying to put extra pressure, but king d8 is played. And now Nathan tries to put extra pressure on that pin now, but it can be sufficiently defended by rook a7. And then we get f6, because the idea is to play this and put more pressure, but bishop takes f6 is a cold shower for white, because that hits the rook. And then if you go back to, let's say, well, that blocks the bishop. So if you go back here, then king e7, and now your hands are kind of tied. You don't have any more attack, like, but this just hangs this. Yeah, rook d5. He tries to do the similar idea. Rook e8, bishop f5, rook e7. Jessica is protecting that bishop. It will not be taken. Knight to g3, right? Knight to g3 is maybe trying to rotate in and hit the bishop. King to e8 breaks the pin. We get takes. And now it's a knight versus bishop endgame. Takes. So all in all, that was takes. And now we have a situation where 2-on-1 and then 2-on-3 over here. So a knight versus bishop. So it's a very imbalanced endgame, which is definitely not drawable yet. Like if you offered a draw over the board, this would be considered very impolite for probably both sides because they both have chances still. A4 takes. And now white has a passed pawn that's promoting on the opposite color of the bishop. So that's going to be a worry that black has to deal with. But may I draw your attention to the position of the kings, as this will become relevant. White's king is very secluded. whereas black's king has way more easy access to the center and more ability to maybe help those pawns forward. Bishop c3 blockades the pawn. We get king g1. Both sides are bringing their kings in. f5, g6, just protecting all the pawns. White really doesn't have any way to get in. King to d3, bishop a5, just getting in front of the pawn and making the king commit to running over here to get rid of it. Well, meanwhile, this king will go here and just pressure all this stuff. King c4, f4, knight moves. That happens here, push, and then black can literally just sacrifice the bishop. Because the king, like I said before, is way more active than white's king. So they will be able to find their way down here and pick off these pawns and maybe have a chance at winning. King e5 here, here, here. King e3. What black's king is completely preventing white from getting in. Knight d4, king f2, king d3. And surprisingly, white can afford to lose both of these pawns, and it is still a draw because of two moves. One is king f3, taking the opposition. And if h5 is played kind of like a pass back move, then knight f5, here, here, here. If h5 is played, this kind of kills the momentum. Knight d4, like what are they going to do now? Here, then something like knight e6 is going to happen, and these pawns are eventually going to fall, and it's going to be a draw because knight is not sufficient checkmating material. But the other drawing move in this position is knight f5 right away because it kind of transposes into the same position as earlier, and that white has a drawing idea. King f5 is Nathan plays king f5, which is losing because of king to h4 or king to g3, guarding the pawn, passing back the move to white. King e4, king g2. Uh-oh, uh-oh, spadoodios. That's not good. So let's see if black can convert this. King h4, knight f3 check, boom, boom. Here. And by the way, if you sacrifice and go here, that's just going to promote. Knight f1, he's trying to harass the king as much as he can. Knight e3. Yeah, and that g pawn is just coming, right? Like, you can't sack the knight for both of these pawns. You only can sack for one and then allow a promotion with the other. g2 and the game is over. And black wins, which is a bit disappointing, honestly. Like, he had a good position for a lot of that. It was still very exciting. And with that, I've been the amazing Haley, and I will see you in the next video. 안녕하세요, which means bye in Korean.